Ever notice how the guys who get called such a good friend are almost never the ones who end up in a relationship? That's not bad luck. That's a pattern, and once someone learns to see it, it becomes impossible to unsee. Most men believe being kind, available, and endlessly supportive is exactly what builds attraction. The uncomfortable truth is the opposite. Those very qualities, delivered in the wrong context, are often what quietly seal someone into the friend zone before the relationship even had a real chance to begin. Here's the part that catches people off guard. The friend zone rarely announces itself. There's no dramatic conversation, no clear rejection, nothing overt enough to trigger alarm bells. Instead, it builds silently, through small signals most men never learn to read, buried inside conversations that feel warm and promising on the surface. By the time the label becomes obvious, months or even years can already be gone, spent chasing something that was never actually available. That's exactly what this video breaks down. 7 specific, research-backed signs, pulled directly from attraction psychology and real behavioral patterns, that reveal whether someone has already been placed in that role, often without realizing it. No guesswork. No vague advice. Just clear signals in body language, conversation, and behavior that separate friendship from something with real romantic potential. Before diving in, drop a comment below with the number of the sign that hits closest to home, the one moment where it clicked. That kind of honesty helps other men recognize the same pattern in their own lives. And if learning how to read women, decode body language, and understand attraction on a deeper level matters, hit like and subscribe now, because what's coming next in this channel builds directly on everything covered here. There's a moment that happens more often than most men realize, and it usually slips by disguised as trust. She brings up a guy she's been talking to, maybe someone from the gym or a coworker who's been texting her, and she does it so casually that it barely registers as information. But in the world of attraction psychology, this moment carries weight. Reading body language and conversational cues together is what separates the men who understand women's body language from the ones who stay confused for years. When a woman feels safe enough to talk about her romantic interests in someone else, right in front of you, that comfort is telling you something specific about the box she's already placed you in. Here's where most men get it wrong, and it's worth sitting with for a second. She mentions the guy, and instead of noticing the signal, the average man leans into supportive friend mode. He asks follow-up questions. He offers advice on how she should respond to a text. He might even help her decide what to wear on the date. This is one of the most common blind spots in dating advice for men, because the very act of engaging supportively feels like closeness, when it's actually the opposite. It's compliance with a role that's already been assigned, not evidence of romantic potential. Think about it like being handed a script and only reading your lines out loud without ever checking what part you were cast to play. A man who's genuinely training himself in attraction psychology learns to notice this early, almost like a smoke detector going off in a quiet room. Picking up on signs of attraction, or the absence of them, isn't about becoming paranoid or cynical toward every woman in his life. It's about paying attention to female body language signals and conversational patterns with enough clarity to know where he actually stands, instead of assuming a position he was never given. There's a practical exercise worth trying here, something that can sharpen this skill fast. Next time this situation comes up, notice the tone she uses when she brings up the other guy. Is she animated, giddy, slightly nervous in the way people get when discussing someone they're excited about? Or is she neutral, treating it as she would any other piece of daily gossip? That distinction alone is one of the clearest examples of how to read women without overanalyzing every single word. It's less about hunting for hidden clues and more about learning to sit with what's already right in front of him. None of this means shutting down or going cold every time she opens up about her love life. It means holding a bit of internal awareness while staying warm, present, and unbothered on the surface. That balance, between emotional intelligence and self-respect, is something that gets built slowly, almost like a muscle that responds to repetition rather than intensity. And once a man starts noticing this particular sign clearly, he starts noticing something else too, something that shows up in a much quieter, much sneakier way, who's actually initiating the time they spend together. Here's something that quietly reveals more than almost any conversation ever could, and it has nothing to do with words at all. It's about who's doing the reaching. If every single hangout, every coffee, every, "Hey, wanna grab food later," text originates from him and never from her, that pattern is worth paying close attention to. In attraction psychology, initiation is one of the loudest, most consistent signs of attraction there is, because people generally make time, on their own, for what they actually want in their life. When that spark of initiative is missing entirely on her end, it's rarely an accident. The tricky part is that most men misread her agreeing to plans as proof that she's interested, and that's an easy trap to fall into. She says yes, she shows up, she seems happy to be there, so surely that counts for something, right? Not quite. This is one of the more common mix-ups in dating advice for men, confusing passive availability with active desire. A woman being free on a Friday night and willing to hang out is very different from a woman rearranging her own schedule, texting first, or suggesting the next time they see each other. Reading body language in the moment matters, sure, but reading patterns over weeks and months matters even more. There's an analogy that tends to stick with people here. Imagine sending invitations to a party, week after week, and the same person always shows up, always seems glad to be there, but never once thinks to host their own gathering or invite anyone over first. Eventually the question becomes obvious: is this person genuinely excited about the connection, or just comfortable going along with whatever's already been arranged? That's the essence of learning how to read women beyond the surface-level interactions. Signs of attraction tend to show up in effort, not just in pleasant company. A useful thing to actually track, instead of just intuiting it, is a simple 2-week experiment. Stop initiating entirely for a short stretch and just observe what happens. Does she reach out first, suggest something, ask where things stand? Or does the silence stretch uncomfortably, with zero indication she even noticed the gap? This kind of small, low-stakes test tends to expose female body language signals and behavioral patterns far more clearly than any single conversation ever could, because it removes the noise of politeness and gets straight to actual priority. None of this is about keeping score or turning every interaction into a transaction, because that mindset backfires fast and reads as insecurity rather than confidence. It's simply about noticing where the energy is actually flowing from. And once that pattern becomes visible, something else starts to stand out almost immediately, something that shows up in a much smaller, much more physical way: how she responds every time a compliment, even a small one, comes her way. A particular reaction tends to give away more than people intend, and it happens in the span of about 2 seconds. He says something genuine, maybe about how she looks tonight or how sharp she was in a conversation, and instead of a warm pause or a flicker of shyness, she deflects it almost instantly. A quick, "oh stop," followed by an immediate subject change. In attraction psychology, this kind of reflexive brush-off is one of the more overlooked signs of attraction, or in this case, the lack of it, because genuine romantic compliments tend to land differently than friendly ones, and the body often reacts before the mind has time to filter anything. This is where reading body language becomes more useful than listening to the words themselves. When someone receives a compliment they feel is romantically charged and they're actually open to it, a small delay usually shows up, maybe some eye contact held a beat longer, or a slight change in posture. When romantic interest isn't present, the nervous system doesn't produce that same reaction. Instead, it moves straight to managing the moment. She might laugh it off, insert a joke, or actively redirect the conversation somewhere safer. Female body language signals like this stay subtle, but they show up consistently enough to notice once someone starts paying attention on purpose. Think of it like offering someone a gift they weren't expecting. If the gift means something to them, hesitation usually follows, a "wait, really?" kind of energy, even if it only lasts a second. If they hand it right back, still smiling, still friendly, but clearly uncomfortable holding onto it, that discomfort carries information of its own. This is one of those situations where dating advice for men often gets oversimplified into, just compliment her more, when the real skill lies in observing how the compliment gets received, not just delivering it. A practical way to actually test this without overthinking it involves varying the compliment itself. Try complimenting something surface level, like her outfit, and separately compliment something more personal, like her mind or her sense of humor. Notice if the deflection pattern stays consistent across both, or if one type gets brushed off faster than the other. Learning how to read women effectively often comes down to running small, low-pressure comparisons like this instead of relying on a single interaction to draw conclusions. None of this means a man should stop complimenting her altogether or start feeling embarrassed for being genuine, because withdrawing entirely usually does more damage than the deflection itself. It just means noticing the pattern instead of ignoring it out of hope. And once that pattern becomes clear, another situation deserves attention, one that involves being handed something far more direct than a passing comment, her own interest in someone else, presented right to his face. Few moments cut through the confusion faster than this one, even though most men manage to miss it anyway. She brings a guy into the conversation, not as a passing mention this time, but directly, asking what he thinks of him. Maybe she shows a photo, maybe she asks him to weigh in on a text this other man sent, wanting a second opinion from someone she trusts. In attraction psychology, this moment ranks among the clearest, least ambiguous signs of attraction placed in the wrong direction, because a woman generally doesn't invite feedback on a potential partner from a man she views as one herself. The habit worth breaking here shows up almost automatically in most men, and it happens before logic even gets a chance to weigh in. He gives his honest opinion. He points out red flags, or maybe even encourages her, thinking that being generous and supportive earns points somehow. This particular blind spot appears constantly in dating advice for men, because the instinct to be helpful overrides the instinct to notice what the moment actually represents. Answering the question reinforces the role of trusted advisor, not romantic contender, and every honest answer given only cements that position further. An analogy that tends to land well here involves a casting director. Picture someone auditioning actors for a role, then turning to a friend sitting beside them and asking, "So, what do you think of this guy for the part?" That friend clearly isn't being considered for the role himself, he's there to help decide who gets it. Reading body language and situational context together makes this distinction obvious once it's pointed out, yet it slips past most men because the emotional pull of being needed and trusted feels good in the moment, even while it quietly confirms exclusion. A useful shift to try here involves noticing the tone of the response he gives, not just the fact of giving one. Instead of diving straight into detailed feedback, try a lighter, more neutral reply, something like, "Not really my area of expertise," and pay attention to how she reacts. Does she push for a real answer anyway, treating the input as essential? Or does she shrug it off and move on just as easily? That reaction alone speaks volumes about how to read women in situations where the label has already been quietly assigned. Female body language signals combined with this kind of verbal follow-up often confirm what the initial request already suggested. None of this means shutting down or refusing to engage every time she brings someone else up, because that kind of coldness tends to backfire and damage the relationship entirely. It simply means recognizing what role has already been handed out, without spending more energy auditioning for a different one. And once this pattern becomes visible, another layer worth watching involves something even more physical than conversation, whether any touch, any lingering contact, ever happens between them at all. Warmth in a friendship can feel identical to warmth in something more, right up until the physical dimension gets examined closely. Two people can laugh easily, share long conversations, even sit close together at dinner, and still carry zero romantic charge between them. In attraction psychology, physical touch tends to serve as one of the most reliable signs of attraction, because touch operates on a different channel than conversation. Words can be polite, careful, even performative. Touch, especially unplanned or spontaneous touch, tends to happen automatically, driven by something the conscious mind rarely controls. Reading body language in this context means paying attention to small, easily missed details, a hand resting on an arm during a laugh, a shoulder bump that lingers half a second too long, sitting slightly closer than necessary on a couch clearly big enough for distance. When romantic interest exists, these small moments tend to happen naturally, without either person forcing them. When only friendship exists, physical space usually stays respected and comfortable, but flat, almost like an invisible boundary neither person feels compelled to cross. Here's where most men misjudge the situation entirely, and this mistake shows up constantly in dating advice for men's circles. Emotional closeness gets treated as proof of romantic potential, when the two things run on completely separate tracks. A woman can share her deepest struggles, cry in front of him, trust him with secrets she wouldn't tell her own family, and still feel absolutely nothing physically. Female body language signals around touch tend to expose this gap clearly. Once someone knows what to actually look for instead of assuming emotional intimacy automatically includes physical intimacy. A practical way to test this involves paying attention to reciprocity rather than presence. Try a light, appropriate touch, maybe a hand on the shoulder during a joke, and notice what happens next. Does she lean in slightly, mirror the gesture later, or seem entirely unbothered and comfortable? Or does a subtle stiffening happen, a small step back, a shift in posture that puts a bit more distance between them? Learning how to read women through touch often reveals more in 3 seconds than an entire evening of conversation ever could. None of this means turning physical contact into a constant test or making every interaction feel calculated, because that kind of self-consciousness tends to create exactly the awkwardness he's trying to avoid. It simply means noticing where the warmth stops and staying honest about what that boundary actually represents. And once this becomes clear, one more conversation deserves attention, one where she talks openly about wanting a relationship, without ever once factoring him into that picture. A particular kind of conversation tends to sting more than most men admit, even while they sit through it smiling and nodding along. She opens up about wanting a boyfriend, about being tired of being single, about looking forward to finding someone who checks certain boxes, and she says all of this directly to him, sitting right there, without a flicker of consideration that he might already fit the description. In attraction psychology, this particular gap reveals one of the clearest signs of attraction missing entirely, because genuine romantic interest tends to insert itself naturally into conversations like this, even if only through a lingering glance or a slight hesitation. Reading body language during these moments matters just as much as listening to the words themselves. Watch for whether her tone shifts even slightly when discussing what she wants in a partner while looking at him, or whether the conversation flows exactly the same as it would with any other friend. When romantic possibility exists between two people, these conversations often carry a certain charge, an awareness that hangs in the air even if neither person names it directly. When that charge stays completely absent, the conversation moves along smoothly, openly, without any of that quiet tension. This situation trips up plenty of men because hope tends to fill in gaps that reality leaves empty. Dating advice for men frequently overlooks this specific blind spot, assuming that because she trusts him enough to discuss her dating life, some door remains open on his end too. The opposite tends to hold true. Sharing this kind of vulnerability with him, without factoring him into any part of the equation, actually confirms how firmly she's already placed him outside the running. Female body language signals paired with this kind of conversational transparency often paint a picture far clearer than either signal alone. A useful approach here involves paying attention to what happens when he responds honestly rather than staying purely supportive. Try saying something like, "Well, what about someone right in front of you," in a light, low-pressure tone, and notice her reaction closely. Does she pause, get flustered, seem caught off guard in a way that suggests she hadn't considered it? Or does she laugh it off immediately, treating the idea as obviously absurd? Learning how to read women through moments like this often requires testing the waters directly instead of waiting for her to bring up the possibility herself. None of this means shutting down every conversation about her dating life or turning distant the moment this topic comes up, because that reaction usually damages the relationship without actually clarifying anything. It simply means noticing where he's been placed and deciding whether staying in that position serves him. And once this pattern becomes obvious, one final sign remains, perhaps the most direct of them all, hearing a specific label attached to the relationship, spoken early, and spoken often. A label carries more weight than most people give it credit for, especially when it gets repeated over and over without anyone questioning why. She introduces him as her best friend to her family. She tells co-workers he's basically her brother. She says it casually, warmly, maybe even proudly, and every single time it happens, it lands like a compliment on the surface while quietly closing a door underneath. In attraction psychology, this repeated labeling stands out as one of the most direct signs of attraction being absent, because people rarely attach a specific, deliberate term to a relationship unless some part of them feels the need to define its boundaries clearly. Reading body language alongside this kind of language matters here too, because the label rarely arrives alone. Watch for how casually and comfortably she says it, without hesitation, without a second thought, almost like stating a fact everyone already agrees on. Compare that to how someone might introduce a person they view romantically, usually with a bit more nuance, a bit more charge in how the words come out. Female body language signals around this moment tend to confirm what the label itself already states outright, leaving very little room for alternate interpretation. Plenty of men fall into a specific trap with this particular sign, treating the label as something temporary, something that might shift given enough time and effort. This mistake shows up constantly across dating advice for men's spaces, the assumption that consistency and patience alone can eventually convert best friend into something more. In reality, the label tends to function as a boundary she's set, whether consciously or not, protecting both people from confusion before it can even start. Hearing it once might mean little. Hearing it repeatedly, across different contexts and different audiences, tends to confirm the category has already been settled. A grounded way to work with this involves paying attention to his own reaction the next time the label comes up, rather than trying to change hers. Notice whether a slight tightness shows up in his chest, whether disappointment creeps in even while he keeps smiling and playing along. That internal signal matters just as much as anything external, because learning how to read women accurately also means learning to read himself honestly, instead of holding on to a version of the relationship that was never actually on the table. None of this means the friendship holds no value or that walking away becomes the only healthy option, because plenty of genuine, lasting friendships start exactly this way. It simply means recognizing the label for what it represents, rather than quietly hoping it changes meaning over time. And once someone learns to spot all 7 of these signs clearly, something else becomes possible, choosing, with real clarity, whether to stay in that role or start building the kind of dynamic where romantic potential actually gets a fair chance to develop. Knowing these 7 signs means nothing if they stay as information sitting quietly in the back of the mind, never actually applied to real life. Real change starts the moment someone stops making excuses for the pattern and starts paying attention to what's actually happening around him, in real time, with real people. So take a moment right now and think honestly, which of these 7 signs shows up in a relationship happening in his life today? Not the one that seems most flattering to admit, but the one that actually feels true. Here's a question worth sitting with. How much longer is he willing to stay in a role that was assigned to him, rather than one he consciously chose? Comfort feels safe, but comfort also has a cost, and that cost is usually time, energy, and emotional investment poured into something that was never designed to become more. Real growth requires an uncomfortable kind of honesty, the willingness to look at a situation clearly instead of through the lens of hope. This applies far beyond one specific person or one specific situation. Learning to read body language, understand attraction psychology, and recognize signs of attraction, or the absence of them, changes how every future interaction gets approached. It becomes a filter for making better decisions, faster, with far less wasted time and far less unnecessary heartbreak. So here's the challenge: pick one sign from this video, just one, and actively watch for it this week in whatever situation applies. Notice it. Sit with what it reveals. That single act of paying attention starts building a skill most men never develop, and that skill changes everything moving forward. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications right now, because deeper, more specific breakdowns on how to read women, decode female body language signals, and master dating advice for men are coming next, and missing them means staying stuck exactly where he already is.